morning, Bucknutters. Welcome to the Bucknuts Morning 5 here on Wednesday, June 17th, 2015. I am Dave Biddle, and I'm joined by the people's champ, Matt Baxendale. Bax, the college commissioners are expected to vote later today on whether to add an early signing period for college football, much like what we see in college basketball. However, if they do add it, it is going to be not right before the season like it is in college basketball. I've always opined that if they were going to make a early signing period in football, it would probably be August. And my rationale was in basketball, the early signing period is in late October, early November, right before the basketball season starts. So I thought if they adopted an early signing period for football, it would occur right before the football season starts. If they're going to do it, they're going to do it December 16th, so less than 2 months away from what we know is signing day, about a month and a half away. So we're going to talk about the pros and cons of an early signing period. Let's assume that they pass this today, Bax. What are the pros and cons as you see them of an early signing period in college football?
Well, there's not as many pros and cons as I would have thought if it had been August. Let's put it that way. If you're Ohio State, I think there are only cons, because if you're Ohio State, you're attracting the best kids, the kids who want to compete at a high level. And if you look at Urban Meyer's track record, he goes out late and he gets some kids, some of whom seem pretty darn committed to the school that they were previously going to until Urban gets in their ear. So I guess the pros are if there's a waffling player and you can get his signature, then he's officially locked in. But I think it's only a con for the players at this point, because you're going to see a lot of kids who are like committed but not certain end up signing with the school and then really end up regretting it. The other thing is that, with the early signing period in December, the one pro that I'm going to point out about the signing period in December versus August is, if you're a recruit, you're going to know whether or not your head coach lost his job from the previous year. So the only way you would sign with the program whose coach ends up leaving would be if that coach ends up taking another job after a bowl game. So, 2 months beforehand, I would have absolutely expected it to be August, just like you said. And in the interim, I guess we'll just have to see how it plays out, but I think it's going to put a lot of pressure on kids who are 80% to some of these mid-level schools. The coaches are going to really lean on them to sign, whereas for a school like OSU, it's not a good thing, because if those kids end up signing, then they're no longer flippable. And if you're OSU, you're not too worried about any of your players ending up elsewhere. That's going to be an issue with maybe one player in every class you have to sort of defend down the stretch. So, because a lot of these kids have been committed for a very long time, or they go to Ohio State because they know it's the best opportunity out there to win a national championship, move on to the next level and all of that. This is good for the Purdues of the world, or the Mississippi States of the world, who are trying to hold on to their top kids down the stretch. But for Ohio State, I see mostly the only downside for recruits. I guess the only thing we can say is that at least some of them can get it over early.
Our buddy Mark Neal from AM 1410 in Dayton nicknamed Urban Meyer the Spatula, because he flips so many recruits late, and that'd be tough to do now if there's an early signing period. But, at least it would be in December and not August, which would give Urban still some time to flip some guys. But and I think there has to be a stipulation. Let's say this is passed. I've said if it's going to be in August, there has to be a stipulation, like you mentioned, that if a coach leaves, that player, the signing then becomes unbinding, because if the coach leaves, the player should be able to sign with whoever he wants to. I think it should be the same deal with December 16th. I remember with Rich Rodriguez, for example, they hung on to him till after the bowl game for some reason, and ended up with Brady Hoke. Good job there, Michigan. If there's a situation like that where a coach is not fired by December 16th and he is let go or leaves for another school after the bowl season, even if the kid signs during the December 16th through December 18th early signing period, I think that kid should be able to get out of that contract, so to speak.
Do you think they're actually going to let him do that, though? I mean, a situation where a head coach leaves, I think the commissioners are going to vote on it, but I don't know if they're going to give that sort of stipulation. You may see it sort of like with some of the early signings for kids in basketball, where they release the kid from their scholarship because it's bad publicity if they don't. But I don't know if it's going to be mandated. That's something that, especially for an August early signing period, I always was under the impression that if they were going to be able to do it, they would have to do it with the caveat that when you sign this letter of intent, it means that it will be binding so long as whoever is the head coach still on the day of National Signing Day in February. I'm not so sure that they're going to vote it in that way. It's only 2 months ahead of time now, and that could create some ugly press for some schools down the line as well.
I find this interesting, Bax. Most conferences have not come out and said anything about this. The Big Ten has been just completely radio silent about this. However, the SEC has not been. They have come out against this, probably for the same reasons that you're outlining, and not the lower tier schools. Probably schools like Alabama, the big boys, are like, no, we want to wait as long as possible. We want to be able to flip guys late in the process. But I do find it interesting that the SEC is the lone conference that has come out to speak out about this. Your thoughts on that?
Well, yeah, absolutely what you just said. SEC schools love the idea of bringing in kids who are on visits to warm weather in January, something that doesn't happen exactly in a lot of places. For them, it's another competitive advantage that they don't want to be ceding. And in a time where they can't do satellite camps and they can't win national titles the last few years, and now they're looking at a position where, if you're LSU and there's a kid from the state of Mississippi and you're missing some of your targets and he's committed to Mississippi State, well, you're going to have a great chance of flipping him if you offer him in January, because all your other targets are gone. I mean, LSU's a better opportunity to go to play college football than Mississippi State, I think most people would agree. And if you're one of the big boy schools, that kid may be locked up and it gives you less options. I mean, there's a lot of examples of kids. For example, look at Urban Meyer when he came to OSU. Taylor Decker could have been signed with Notre Dame before Urban even had a chance to get him on campus. That's an example of the type of thing that you're seeing for the big boys that they wouldn't be able to get. So, yeah, I think SEC schools, especially in that league, where the coaches recruit you until the last second, that you could be signing your letter of intent, and you have two coaches telling you not to do it. That league in particular, top to bottom, it's such a cutthroat competition to get recruits that I can absolutely see why a lot of the people in that league do not want anything to do with it, because the trickle-down effect is if you're Mississippi State and you lose that kid to LSU, well, you want to take that kid who was going to Troy or to some Sun Belt school that you guys really like, the two-star player. Well, you want to get him on your roster and stash him as a redshirt or stash him at a junior college for 2 years like they do down there. So, yeah, the trickle-down effect is that a lot of the mid-level programs are going to get players who pan out at a higher rate because the big-level schools can't steal them away down the stretch and create that trickle-down effect.
For those who are wondering, this could take effect this year, December 16th of this year, if this is passed. Now, they could theoretically pass it and not put it into effect until next year. But from what I understand, I know the MAC commissioner came out and thinks that it will pass and it will take effect beginning this year. So that's pretty surprising, Bax. Usually when something like this, a big change like this happens, they might vote on it, but it doesn't take effect until the following year. We're talking about this year. So Ohio State's 2016 recruiting class, ranked number 2 in the country, these guys might be able to start signing on December 16th. So maybe in that respect it'll be good for Ohio State. Some of these guys like Kareem Walker, they can theoretically sign them, then not have to worry about them for the final 1.5 months. But I do find it very interesting because it's so rare in the sports world when something big happens that it would take effect that same year. Your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I agree with you completely. This has to change the way the coaches plan their offers in a significant fashion. You're going to see a flurry of kids get offered as soon as team seasons end around December 1st again. We always talked about seeing offers to kids late in January, or if kids came for an official visit, they would get offered. You hear stories about that all the time to see how interested a kid really is and all that stuff. And this is going to change the way it works completely. I mean, it almost may be a negative. Like if you're a school like Ohio State playing to the December 5th to December 12th or something in a bowl game, a conference championship game, it's going to be a situation where those coaches are on recruiting even more so than they already do, because they have to gauge which kids they think are going to sign early. And if your own recruits aren't going to sign early, do you actively start recruiting to fill that position? You're going to hear stories of some coaches out there who tell recruits, hey, you have an ultimatum. If you don't sign with us, we can't guarantee your spot. That's going to happen. And schools are going to throw out a flurry of offers starting around December 1st to make sure that they fill their quotas. And that's only going to get crazier after the early signing day passes, and schools are looking at what's left. You may see some kids, I guess here's a thought, though, too, is that let's say you're one of those rare, non-committed, high 3-star kind of kids who's kind of weighing his options, and 10 schools lose 6 kids on the board ahead of you. All of a sudden, you're going to fly up their boards, and you're going to have maybe a better opportunity. But that's in the rare situation where you hold out to commit at all. I think a lot of schools are going to tell kids if they don't sign early, they're not going to necessarily honor their commitment.
And once again, to let listeners know, the commissioners are voting today, to our understanding, and we're going to have full coverage on the site. We're not exactly sure when this vote's going to come down. We're not sure when it's going to be announced. But again, the MAC commissioner has been quoted. He thinks it's going to pass, and if a commissioner's coming out and saying that, I have to think it'll pass. So keep it locked to the site. We'll have on the early signing period whether or not this vote passes on the site later today. And the last topic real quick before I let you go, Bax. I did a piece for the site yesterday ranking the top 6 running backs in Ohio State history. I worked on this piece all day because you can't just talk about the top 6. You have to talk about the guys who were awesome but weren't quite in the top 6. And Ohio State really is running back you. There have been so many guys that are fantastic running backs that didn't even crack the top 6. But just focusing on the modern era of Ohio State football, the top 6, number 1 was easy, Archie Griffin. Then I had Eddie George, number 2. I had Keith Byers, 3rd. I had Ezekiel Elliott, 4th. I know it's a small sample size, but I have Ezekiel at 4th. Tim Spencer, 5th. Beanie Wells, 6th.
Well, I have trouble not putting Carlos Hyde the modern era because I think he's better than both Zeke and Beanie. So that alone would be a big departure for me. I think Carlos Hyde was one of the most physical runners we've ever seen at OSU, and the fact that it took his senior year until, I believe, the Clemson game to get tackled for a loss says something about him. I don't think anybody can argue that Archie is number 1, though, the only 2-time Heisman Trophy winner. And it may be that way in 1,000 years because it feels like nobody wants to vote for anybody to win twice anymore. I think Keith Byers is absolutely a great choice in the top 3 as well. I was wondering where you were going to put him, Dave, because he's one of those guys that, if it hadn't been for Doug Flutie throwing that Hail Mary pass, Keith Byers would have won a Heisman Trophy. And, of course, Eddie George is a great selection as well. But I think you also have to give honorable mention, if we're talking about small sample sizes, to one Maurice Clarett, who had maybe 3/4 of a season because he was injured in 2002, where if he had, and we've all said this 1,000 times, but if Clarett had been able to keep his head straight and stay around for 3 years, he may have been the best we'd ever seen at OSU. Nobody ran with as much anger as Clarett. Let's put it that way. So he's certainly a name you got to throw out there as well. But and I will say this too, Tim Spencer, I never even got to see him play. So there's a little bit of a different era there for me. But I have to say that Carlos Hyde, if we're going in the modern era, I would put him ahead of both Beanie Wells and ahead of Zeke Elliott. We've seen enough from Carlos Hyde in the 2 years that he started that I was so impressed with him. I mean, for my money, he's the best tailback we've had since the Byers and George, combination in the 80s and 90s. Those two were clearly the best of their own decade for the Buckeyes. But, somebody's going to carry that mantle of, this new millennium. I would definitely pick Carlos to be near the top.
Good stuff out of the People's Champ, Matt Baxendale. I appreciate it, Bax. And thanks to the listeners out there. Appreciate you guys tuning into the show. Hope you have a great day. Take it away, best damn band in the land.